I would like to share with you a tribute to the memory of the late Jonathan Sacks, Chief Rabbi of England and a mentor and rabbi and friend of mine. The best way to give a tribute to a great leader is to quote from his writings. In his book, A Letter in the Scroll, which is Understanding Our Jewish Identity and Exploring the Legacy of the World's Oldest Religion, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks quotes a verse in Devarim, chapter 29, pasuk 14, which says in English the following: I am making this covenant with its oath, not only with you who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord our God, but also with those who are not here with us today. Rabbi Sacks delves into the explanation of the Akedas Yitzchak, Rabbi Yitzchak Arama, in giving an explanation as to how is it possible that Hashem could bind future generations. How can a contract, how can a covenant, a bris, given by Moshe Rabbeinu on the eve of the Jewish people entering into the land of Israel, standing on the side of the Jordan, about to cross the Jordan River, entering into Israel, how could that statement be true? How can it be binding? How can Hashem, through Moshe Rabbeinu, through the voice of Moshe Rabbeinu, how could he bind generations to come? How can this covenant and bris bind us, generations yet unborn, to a contract which we didn't sign? He gives certain answers, and then he gives this lightning bolt answer on page 44 of his book, A Letter in the Scroll. He says the following: imagine that while browsing in the library, you come across one book, unlike the rest, which catches your eye because on its spine is written the name of your family. Intrigued, you open it and see many pages written by different hands in many languages. You start reading it, and gradually you begin to understand what it is. It is the story each generation of your ancestors has told for the sake of the next generation, so that everyone born into this family can learn where they came from, what happened to them, what they lived for, and why. As you turn the pages, you reach the last, which carries no entry but a heading. It bears your name. The late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was, I believe, beyond being a thinker, a philosopher, an orator, a leader of rabbis, a leader of men. He was a challenger. With his philosophy, his deep thinking, his philosophical understanding of Judaism and of the world, he was challenging the world, challenging nations, challenging Great Britain, and challenging us as Jews. What is our role in Judaism? How can we take things further? I personally felt that call, that challenge from him, as I was very close with Chief Rabbi Sacks. I met him first in 1990 when I was a Kollel student, preparing to take a position as a rabbi in London, England. I had already been interviewed by Chief Rabbi Emanuel Jacobowitz, the previous Chief Rabbi, and accepted a position as a rabbi of the new West End Synagogue, which would take place a few months hence. And Chief Rabbi Sacks had been appointed as his successor. And during the Gulf War, Chief Rabbi Sacks was in Israel, preparing for his position and installation as a chief rabbi. We met in Yamin Moshe in an apartment. He told me about his dreams and of his plans to build a decade of renewal. And so he did. His first act as chief rabbi was to declare a decade of renewal of Judaism, of Jewish life. And he did much to inspire Jews all around England and perhaps the Commonwealth, in Hong Kong and in Europe, to be more inspired, more connected to Judaism. He did this through his writings. I attended many rabbinical meetings with him. And there was one particular incident where we were discussing as rabbis the response of the Orthodox community to the Limud conference. The Limud conference was an open conference of some Orthodox, some Reform, some Masorti conservative Jews, some liberal Jews, progressive Jews, teaching Judaism over a weekend in December at a university. And the question was whether we as Orthodox rabbis can sanction going to that conference, which is made up of Reform, Orthodox, conservative Jews, if we would go and speak there, if the chief rabbi would go and speak there, if we as rabbis would go and speak there, are we sanctioning different streams of Judaism? And at that time, as is still the case today in England, the main Judaism stream is Orthodoxy, run by the United Synagogue and the Federation of Synagogues and the Sephardi community in England. The Masorti conservative movement and the Reform movements are very small and not as powerful as the mainstay. Even those who are not Shomer Shabbat, not keeping Shabbos, they belong to Orthodox synagogues. They like the tradition, the Anglo tradition of Judaism, and they belong to Orthodox synagogues, and they're buried in Orthodox cemeteries. And the question was, the Orthodox rabbinate, led by the chief rabbi, if we go there to that conference, we are sanctioning and giving credence and legitimacy to these other so-called streams of Judaism. Should we do that or not? Diane Ehrentreu, the Av Beis Din, and Chief Rabbi Sachs said, we need an alternative. I raised my hand and I said, Chief Rabbi, why don't we make our own Orthodox conference? He said, Yisroel, go ahead, gather some friends together and make a conference. That will be our response. I raised my hand and I said, is anyone here interested in joining with me at a meeting next Tuesday to discuss forming our own conference? And my friend, Rabbi Saul Znaimer, met together at Rabbi Ivan Binstock's house, Dayan Binstock, a Dayan of the London Beis Din, together with Rabbi Alan Kimchi and Rabbi Julian Schindler, and we planned the bare bones of this idea called the Encounter Conference. This happened in 1995. In 1996, we held the first Encounter Conference, and the guest speaker was Chief Rabbi Sachs and Chief Rabbi Lau, the Chief Rabbi of Israel. We had 1,600 people attend the conference in London. The next year, I went to the rabbis of Manchester, and I said, do you want to participate and have a Manchester Encounter Conference? They said, well, you're not going to get the same numbers here in Manchester as you did in London. You've got 1,600 people. The largest event that we've ever had here in Manchester was 300 people at a speaking event. I said, well, let's try it. You'll never know. They got together in Manchester, the rabbis, they put together the conference and gave them support of our speakers from our conference, which happened the same week, the following year, 1997. And they had 3 nights, Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Saturday night. And they had 1,600 people per night at the Manchester Encounter Conference, attended by Chief Rabbi Sachs. He was the keynote speaker, the uplifting speaker, the inspiring speaker. He was the person who granted credibility to every speaking event, every event in London. And he was a much sought after speaker. And then I went to Glasgow, to Scotland, and I asked them to begin a conference. And they had 300 people at their conference, attended by Rabbi Wine. And at these conferences, we had people fly in from all over the world, great speakers, Rabbi Tursky, Rabbi Wine, Rabbi Jungreis, great speakers from America, Rabbi Tatz. And people spoke at the conference in London and in Manchester and in Glasgow. We had breakout rooms, we had music. It was a tremendous inspiration. And the Encounter Conference went on from 1996 until 2006 in London. And it was led by the inspiration of Chief Rabbi Sachs and Diane Ehrentreu of the Av Beis Din. I had many meetings with Chief Rabbi Sachs at his home at 85 Hamilton Terrace, the official residence of the Chief Rabbi in St. John's Wood. And his wife would greet us at the door, offer us tea with milk or tea without milk, the British way. And we would discuss different ideas that I had. And he gave me his opinion, different conferences, different projects that I was embarking upon. Chief Rabbi Sachs inducted me as the rabbi of the New West End Synagogue in November of 1991. I attended his inauguration in September 1991 in the presence of Prince Philip. I still remember that speech, an amazing speech where he said, chief rabbis have vision and very rarely die. And he had vision that we cannot fail. He said that the first Commonwealth of Judaism, after the first Beis Hamikdash failed, the second Beis Hamikdash failed, and now we're in the third Commonwealth, and we're about to enter into a return to Israel, and this time we cannot fail. His message to us was, we cannot and should not fail in this third attempt to rebuild Judaism. And he was plagued by the assimilation in the country, and which is plaguing all around He was very bothered by the assimilation of young Jews walking away from Judaism, and he would try to come up with ideas and projects to inspire Jews in his decade of renewal, his first 10 years as chief rabbi. To speak about his challenge to us, let's read on in his book, A Letter in the Scroll. And he says the following: there is nothing in the past that can bind you in the present. No history that can make a difference to who you are and who you are free to choose to be. But this cannot be the whole truth. Were I to find myself holding such a book in my hands, the book with my family's name on the spine, which I found in the library, my life would already have been changed. Seeing my name and the story of my forebears, I could not read it as if it were just one story among others. Instead, reading it would inevitably become, for me, a form of self-discovery. Once I knew that it existed, I could not put the book back on the shelf and forget it, because I would now know that I am part of a long line of people who travel toward a certain destination and whose journey remains unfinished, dependent on me to take it further. In this statement, and in the rest of this amazing, lightning bolt book, Chief Rabbi Sacks has a legacy that is given to us. He was a person of philosophy, but he turned that philosophy into a personal challenge to each of us. How are we going to write our name in the history of the Jewish people? How are we going to bind ourselves to the contract? The contract is there for us to take. It's up to us to connect ourselves to that contract. At his funeral last year, one of his daughters eulogized him and said, "My father was a seeker of solutions. He would not accept that there are no solutions to problems. He would say, let's try to solve the problem of anti-Semitism while the kettle was boiling for tea." He would always think about how we can solve the age-old questions of Jewish connection, Jewish continuity. He founded something called Jewish Continuity in England to keep Judaism going. And so many times we worked together with him as the rabbinate, as friends, as colleagues, trying to keep up with him, with his ideas. And now he has left us a legacy, a challenge. And I believe that we have to respond to that challenge. I think this book, A Letter in the Scroll, is required reading for every Jewish family. I think it's an inspiring, lightning bolt book that lights the way, but then with every lightning bolt, after the lightning dissipates, there is darkness. The lightning bolt lights up the way for a moment, a flash of light. You can see where to go. But then when the lightning dissipates, it's dark again. And we have to follow in that direction, not knowing exactly where to go. Perhaps that is the challenge of Chief Rabbi Sacks. He's challenging us to write our own letter in the scroll. And there are 600,000 letters in the Torah, and each of us is considered to be a letter in the scroll. But we have to write our letter. I was thinking of a way to create a memorial for Chief Rabbi Sacks. Usually, we memorialize people in the cemetery with a matzeva, a monument. The root word of matzeva is lehatziv, nitzav, which means standing. I don't believe that an appropriate memorial for Chief Rabbi Sacks would be a physical monument. I think he is, in the words of the prophet, mahalchim bein ha'omdim ha'eleh, walking amongst those who stand still. In the next world, we will also continue walking and not stand still. We must continue to walk in the echo of that lightning bolt that he brought to the world with his brilliance, his oratory, his inspiration, his personality, his kindness. And we must walk in that pathway, even though it's dark now that he has left this world. He has given us a lightning bolt challenge, light up the way, and now we must walk that pathway. And I believe that we can each answer that question by answering the question that he poses in this book, A Letter in the Scroll. Am I going to write my letter in the scroll of Jewish history. I want to begin today a book club called the Jonathan Sacks Lightning Book Club. And I want it to be a dialogue between ourselves to come up with solutions to carry on his work. Not a book club of philosophy, but a book club of ideas, practical concepts of how we can keep Judaism alive, how we can bring Jews back to Judaism. I very much believe in brainstorming. If we have, as we say in England, a brains trust where we share ideas together, then we could perhaps come up with a plan. One of those organizations is Chabad, of which Chief Rabbi Sacks was very fond because the late Lubavitch Rebbe encouraged him to leave the world of pure philosophy and enter into the philosophy of Judaism and bring his oratory and his abilities and his brilliance to a leadership role in Jewish life, which he did. There are other organizations, Esha Torah, Or Sameach, where I studied, the Maor program on campuses of the United States, all trying to connect with Jews. But I believe that Chief Rabbi Sacks was asking each of us as individuals, what can we do as individuals or as families to bring our idea to the table of how we can continue Jewish life, inspire Jewish life, connect others to Jewish life. I believe if we have a brains trust, a brainstorming session online together, and perhaps we can come up with one idea or two ideas which we can implement, put into practice, make happen, that can bring Jews back to answer, yes, I will place my letter in the scroll. I started a new community here in Baltimore called Netzach Yisroel. Our website is called netzach.us, netzach.us, netzach.us. And in the letter section of Contact Us, I invite you to send me a message, an idea, a thought, a proposal, a plan of your idea of how we can promote Jewish continuity, Jewish connection, Jewish inspiration, more Jews coming back to the connection of this wonderful heritage that Chief Rabbi Sacks brilliantly and in a lightning bolt fashion describes in this book. I believe it should be required reading. Please pick up a copy of this book, read it, give your comments to us. I'll post them on a blog on my website called netzach.us, and perhaps we can come up with an idea, share some thoughts together, share some emails, and perhaps put together a plan of how maybe we can bring back one extra Jew to write his or her name in the scroll of Jewish history.